Hey everybody, welcome to Hollywood WordPress. It's cool seeing like so many familiar people. Like, how many people here are here for the first time? Oh, there's actually a good number of first timers too. Cool. Welcome everybody that's a first timer. Welcome everybody that's been here before. This is a meetup group, serves the Hollywood area and virtually anybody in the greater Los Angeles area. We've been doing this now for about a year, and I've been thinking about like the types of people that are drawn to this group. And sometimes I feel like, well, we've got more people that are trying to do freelancing. You know, we've got more people that are trying to do just blogging. And I try to get a gauge every time of like what people are more into, and I think I'm just going to continue to try to establish like, you know, what is the group dynamic and what is it that people want out of the group. Greg Medore, he's right back there getting beer. He's the co-organizer of the group. He and I. Oh, and by the way, at any point in time, feel free to help yourself to this beer back here. And there's this great Mediterranean food that was provided by Media Temple. If you haven't gotten some food yet, head back there. Yes. Suzette Frank is a representative from Media Temple. She made that possible, hooking that up. I'd like to get feedback from folks about where we're taking this, because Greg and I were talking about like what the group really wants this group to be. So I guess what I'd like to ask is, how many people here are doing freelancing already? They're already making money at it. Okay, a good number of people. Okay. How many people here are just doing this recreationally as a hobby? Okay, so everybody's pretty serious about they want to build websites for profit. Am I right in saying that? Can I get some feedback? Yeah. Yes? Yeah. That's okay. Then I think we want to focus in that direction. One thing that Greg and I talked about, and actually Greg brought this up, is this concept of one problem, one solution. And this kind of core concept that I've been thinking about, it's been sticking with me now for about a week. And I think this is a direction that we might start moving in, but I wanted to get a little feedback around this subject. One thing I notice a lot in the WordPress community when I'm going to other meetups is there may be an emphasis put on design, maybe on marketing, and maybe on development. One of the things I feel like in our larger community is that folks are feeling a pressure to be a greater developer. Can I get some feedback on this? Are people feeling like they're feeling pressured to be a greater developer or a stronger developer? Is this like a point of anxiety for people? I want to know. No, it's not. Okay, good. People are looking at the challenge, they're ready to take that challenge on to be a better developer. Yes? It's a good thing? Okay. Because I'm trying to get an idea of like where we want to niche our future talks. And if you guys want to like go deeper as developers, I want to move in that direction. There's a new thing that I've been just like reading a little bit on some blogs about WordPress and that sort of thing. They talk about people being builders and not developers. So one thing I'd like to ask is, if that resonates with you, do you see yourself more as a builder or as a developer? Like if you were to like think about your strategy for how you're building your own business. So let's just start with builders. How many people see themselves as more builder oriented? Yes, I'm sorry, absolutely. Okay, so a builder would be a person that installs a theme, customizes it to some extent, maybe does some child theming, but it kind of stops at that extent. They're listening to their clients, they're fulfilling their clients' needs, but they're using WordPress as a way just to build websites. Whereas developers are not scared of getting into the code, digging in, changing things, digging into the PHP files that are like the core of what WordPress is. They don't mind. They're not scared of doing investigation on custom development. They may be using tools like GitHub and this kind of thing to like do shared development on projects and have version control. So that being said, can I see hands one more time for people that see themselves more as builders? Okay? How many people see themselves more as developers? Okay, good. This is good feedback. Okay, thank you very much. Now what we'll do is we'll just do a few quick announcements. Right now there is one primary announcement that I think is really key. And Natalie, do you want to come up and give this announcement really quick?
You want to put the website
Okay.
up?
Yeah, sure. I know, that's not going to get us there, is it?
That's not it. That's not it. That's it.
There it is.
Yay!
Okay.
So how many people here have never been to a word camp? Never been. How many people have never heard of a word camp? Doesn't know what a word camp is? Okay. Alright, so a word camp is an all-weekend conference focused around everything to do with WordPress. So there are sessions for every level and type of user. So if you're a builder, if you're a developer, if you're a content person, if you're in SEO and marketing, if you have products that are for sale, you sell themes or plugins or anything like that, there is a little bit of something for everybody at a WordCamp. So it is anything and everything related to WordPress. And our local WordCamp will be happening in a couple of months, September 5th, 6th, and 7th. Friday, we're going to have Foundation Friday, which is going to be all-day workshops. We'll have 3 different tracks of workshops on Friday. On Saturday, we have regular conference sessions, and those will run all day, 3 different tracks of those on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we're going to do a contribution day. Don't feel like you have to be a developer to contribute to WordPress. There are lots and lots of different things that you can do and different ways that you can give back to WordPress and back to the WordPress community. So we'd really like to see as many people as possible come out for contribution day on Sunday. In addition to the all-day sessions and the contribution day, you get lunch every day, you get a t-shirt, you get a bag, you get an after party with an open bar, and the ticket is $45. So really, you would spend that much just feeding yourself lunch for those 3 days. So right now, we are looking for speakers. So for our different sessions, if you know anything about WordPress, please consider applying to be a speaker, because there will be people there who know less than you do, I guarantee it. So if you have any special topic you want to talk about, creating content or selling products or development or tips and tricks for designers or ways that you can teach people to add lots of features to their blog without knowing any kind of code, help them be better builders, anything at all that relates to WordPress, you can apply to be a speaker. And you just come over here and click on the little microphone and fill out the form and submit it to us. It's only like 8 fields, so it won't even take you very long. And then we're also looking for volunteers to help us out. So we need volunteers. Obviously, with a ticket price of $45, nobody's getting rich from running this conference. It is completely volunteer run. So me as the main organizer, Greg as the designer, and then the other organizers are all volunteering our time to put this conference together. And we need other volunteers to help us run the conference. And we need everything from helping people get checked in, getting their badges when they show up, helping make sure the rooms run on time, helping to plan the event, helping make sure that we've got catering booked, and the t-shirts made, and all of those kinds of things. So we need all kinds of help. So if you are interested in that, you can click on the volunteers link there and apply to be a volunteer and help us out. And we are really trying to spread the work out to as many volunteers as possible. So if you are a volunteer, you will have one job, and that's it. So we won't throw like a million things at you. It'll just be like, hey, you know what? You're in charge of booking lunch Sunday. And that's it. That's the only thing that you have to do. So don't be shy to volunteer, because we won't overwork you. We promise. We're going to get lots of volunteers, and everybody just does one little thing, and many hands make light work. So September 5th, 6th, and 7th, tickets will go on sale sometime in July. We'll announce that date as soon as we have it finalized. We're looking for speakers, and we're looking for volunteers. Are there any questions? Yes?
Is the location picked up?
Yes, Friday and Saturday will be at Cal State LA, and the Sunday sessions, or the Sunday contribution day, we're still looking for a venue. Right now, the website says it's Alex's apartment. Sure.
How many attendees were there last year?
We had just over, we sold 400 tickets and 320 people actually showed up. This year we're going to sell 600 tickets.
Nice.
So we sold out last year. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, so I think, yeah, do you have a question?
WeWork.
Oh yeah, I want to make a mention about WeWork, our great location. Sarah, do you want to come up and say something about WeWork really quick? We are really fortunate to have this awesome location. So I just like to thank Sarah and WeWork for allowing us to do that. So feel free to, you can come over here if you want to.
My name's Sarah and I work for WeWork. We're basically a community for collaborators. We take buildings and transform them into office spaces and provide a network and technology for startups and small businesses to come and just work with each other. We really host a great environment. We stress community. We really want everyone to get to know each other. There's a couple of WeWork members here. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk about WeWork as well. But if you're interested in office space, you can always come and talk to me after. And we're also getting ready to open a Santa Monica location in February. So we're very excited about that.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other announcements before I move on? Did I miss? Like pretty much that's like there's like one announcement in the community right now. And there's other great WordPress meetups around town. You can go on meetup.com and just look up different cities, you'll probably find one. How many do we have in LA now? Quite a few, right? Like 5 or 6?
There's 19 in Southern California, and I think about a dozen of those are in LA.
Okay. We have a dozen. So, you run one. WordPress 101. It's Karen McCamey. So if you're a beginner and you're looking for more resource at the beginner level, you can talk to Karen. Right now what I want to do is I want to introduce our special guest speaker, Eris Blevins. He comes to us from Team A Design. I don't know how many were here a few months ago when we did the show and tell. Okay, a good number of folks. If you'll remember, they broke down their website they built for Margaret Cho. So right now, I'm excited to have Eris speak once again, and he's going to be speaking on a creative development process. So Eris, if you want to come up.
So there's actually going to be 2 of us. I'm going to talk the most because I'm chatty. My partner Ashley is also going to contribute because she's the CSS end of our team and will have some specific things to contribute. So yeah, our basic talk is going to hit on a number of different points, and it actually works with what Greg was just talking about in terms of trying to make sure that you're having enough time to do your best work. Because I think there's a lot of overhead that goes into doing this, a lot of overhead that goes into managing clients, a lot of overhead that goes into proving out your ideas that have nothing to do with design or development. And so we've been focused on that over the last year and trying to come up with a new way to approach that, and something that we think is a little bit more of a process that allows the fun stuff to happen and you to give a lot of value without quite as much rigmarole. It's in process. It's not perfect. Okay, I will try and project louder. So, how we're going to do this is we have a site that's doing a soft launch tomorrow. It was initially supposed to be already launched, which is a good sense of how this process works. But we'll go through that and sort of talk about this site specifically and what we did to make that work. So yeah, why don't we actually look at that? So we're going to be looking at how we take this site, which is for an organization called SASIS, from here, which is their current site. It's
really old. It's all HTML. It's filled with like broken links and confusing navigation, all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's something that feels a little bit more modern and still, thank you, still covers a lot of their needs. Yeah, so the CES is a nonprofit. They are focused on bringing experimental music to the community. They produce programs, and so they basically make concerts that you can go see. These are the basic outline of it. They got a grant to do this project. The current site is crazy. They are very proud of it on a certain level, but they also need to know it needs to change. A big reason it's so crazy is that it's been built by hand in HTML for a long time now. That results in things like this, or huge areas of confusion in terms of how they're doing their QuickTime streaming. That doesn't work either. This is about 10 years worth of folders within folders within folders, and they have gotten a grant to move that forward. So they also need to bring all their sort of old media along with it. So we had to take a lot of considerations into their legacy content as well. So in a lot of ways, this is a huge project. It's an enormous project for us, and there's a lot to consider in terms of breaking their old habits, but making sure that we still have something that's viable and useful going forward. Our goals in general, as a company, are that we are always looking for a uniquely designed site. We don't necessarily have a house style. We really like to come up with something that fits our customers' needs pretty specifically. In addition, we like to have a back end that is simple and customized and allows them to really run away with the site. You can see this is the back end right now for SAS's. We've got a bunch of custom post types that are all custom written for this. A lot of things that are really straightforward for them to use. And it feels very personalized. In addition to that, we like to allow them to end up with a platform that allows the client to grow, experiment, and feel confident online. We've got a few of our examples here. There's a lot of downsides to these goals. Those are not ways to make money necessarily. Some of the issues with that, unique designs take time. Customized functionality takes time. Clients are already hard to please. Taking risks. Maybe you should do it, maybe not. You need a process if you're going to try and do this. And this is something we basically started to figure out and realize, like, oh, there is a method where we can make this work, rather than just finding ourselves frustrated with the project, frustrated with the client, and feeling completely taken advantage of, as Greg was saying. So this is our beginning of that process. So our steps are always be over-prepared, say no, don't design pages, know when to DIY, and future-proof. So first step is preparation. This is probably one of the most significant elements of work for us, bringing dogs in costumes. Part of this is because you need to know your client, have a clear workflow, assess the content, build wireframes, and understand your known unknowns to be able to actually make this work. Otherwise, you're going to lose money every time with this method. You have to get rid of a lot of the initial conversations that can stall work, lead to confusion, make you have to step back on a design later, or have functionality that you've written that's essentially useless at the end of the day. And you can't do that without these steps at the beginning. So what do we mean when we say know your client? Everyone's like, all right, I know all those guys. Sam, he's got the sandwich shop. It's great sandwiches. You need to understand their goals for the site and get really specific. Get as specific as possible as to what they're trying to do business-wise, what they're trying to do for this group community-wise. What are the things that are failing if you're doing a redesign or they have had a site in the past? What's not working? Not any of the, well, you know, everybody has to have a website. That's unacceptable. It's a nonsense answer for them, and for you, it's like, well, here, I just built one. Why don't you take this one? You need to understand what they like online. What's their savviness? What's their tech savviness? What's their level of being able to use a site? Have they used WordPress before? Do they find Netflix like a confusing user interface? These are important decisions for you if you're going to be building custom functionality for them to work with. If they have a hard time with like Facebook and adding a post, you need to really, really think about that and understand how many more steps you're going to need to take as a developer to make that simpler and actually work. You need to meet all the decision makers. Usually this is a no-brainer. Oftentimes it cannot happen. You'll have one person who, oh, third meeting, this is actually one of our core constituency and they have a lot to say about the site. On this particular project, we did not. We had no idea that there was one key person. That key decision maker needed a ton more handling. For that reason, every single initial time estimate we have, out the window. All of our sign-offs, all of our legwork to get through the design process and get things signed off on was far more effort than we could have anticipated. So yeah, through this whole process, you're basically just building trust. Because part of this at some point is you want to be able to walk away from having meetings every week and check-ins every week and check-ins every other day about these design decisions and go and build the site out. Part of that would be having a clear workflow. This means just stepping them through. What are we going to do? What can you expect from me? Not just a delivered site, but along the way. What are the things you're actually going to have sign off on and what things you're not going to have sign off on? What do you need from them and why? What stuff don't you understand about what they're doing and what stuff do you really need laid out from them? What content is going to take you a long time to work with, what content isn't? And really walking them through why these things have to happen in that order. Why is it okay to only have one YouTube video if they're all YouTube videos, but it's not okay to only have one complicated hypertext essay that has about 50 different asides and 30 different authors, and it has to look a specific way. And also make sure that you explain the points of no return. The areas that if you get to that we haven't hit these dates, you're not going to launch on time. You haven't given me this content, I can't build that. That's a really key element to be able to discuss, because people don't know that. They think that it's all equal. There's a flat sensibility about, well, the videos, the images, the titles, the music files, that's all the same thing. Or they have the exact opposite idea of, well, it's all got to be by year, and the date's got to be after that. So until I see that the year's first, and then the month, and then the day, nothing's right. So you need to really lay out what the actual priorities of the project are. You need to assess the content. So for this project, that was a huge, huge element. This is the first time that they're having to work with structured data. That's just basically any data that goes into a database. It's now got a structure to it. It's got a form. They have a website. They can answer a lot of questions to us about what an event is. But then when we start talking about, well, here's an event. Are all your events like this? Does everything have a buy tickets link? Does it all have one image? Do you have multiple images? Do you ever have videos? All of those things become far more complicated questions and things that they have not thought about at all. So you really need to get into and look over the specific elements of it. Order of items. It's a pretty easy one, right? I mean, WordPress does it out of the box. This goes down. Everything is ordered by post date. Oh, you don't want to use the post date to do that. You don't want to do alphabetized either. You need to drag and drop. Now you know. It's something that will not come up on their side because they don't understand that that's not part of the system. You need to figure out the special cases. Sure, you've got 100% of it is all events. But what about the 5% that are a little different? Talk to me about how the weird things that you guys have had to think about as an organization. Or, if you're not looking at that site, what are the times that you have meetings that you don't have any attendees? It's just about a general open room. All these sorts of things add up and make your life more difficult later if you haven't covered it. And if you do have an existing site, walk through everything that's on that page and say, why is it here? What is this? What does this exist for? Do you need it? Do you want it going forward? Tell me more about this. And a big challenge for us as well was talking about things that are good internally as an organization, things they need on the back end, ways that they need to organize things, and things for the end user. Right? We're building the site for the end user. That's the entire focus of all of this. And a lot of times with clients, there are questions about that element of, well, it's really important for me that they understand that this is my hardest product to sell. Is it important for them to know that? Probably not. We should just figure out a really good way to show that product. That's not the message that it's hard to sell. It's like we want to sell these things. So I think all of that comes in quite a bit, and it's really important to get it out of the way. With this particular client, with this massive amount of content, and their limited budget, we assigned them the task of a content audit. They went through and made a spreadsheet, or I made a spreadsheet, gave it to them with sort of dummy ideas of you get the URL, you get the title, you get just a general layout, line by line of what's on the site. It is quick in relative terms, way for them to make sure that everything they want to go to the new site is going to go to the new site. If you don't have an existing site, you're talking about a content strategy. But you want something that lays out and on the client side where they're really thinking about what they actually want on the site in a different way, in a way that could be translated to a database. That's like a key element because it's so different than anyone who's built a website before. The people who are fairly good HTML developers can be your worst enemy on this because they're like, oh, well, don't worry about that. I'll just go add it in. You're like, well, no, we're going to make that on every page. Those terms are going to be links. They're going to be automatically generated. How are you going to go add those terms? It's not how this works. So they were not able to do the content audit, and we got surprised by that a few times. But for the most part, a lot of our assumptions worked out because of all of this other work that we did with them to get a full understanding of what we're trying to do. So the next step is wireframes. How many people are familiar with wireframes, work with them right now as part of their process? Awesome. That's really good. Everyone else who's doing real development daily, get into it. Do it. It'll save your dreams behind. So what are they? They're just very simple graphics that represent what you're trying to do with your site. Are they? They're not designed, they're just structural elements that we go through and this. Yeah, so these are really, they're not particularly attractive, but they go through and they start laying out exactly what you're talking about. This is our initial homepage. Just as a topic of conversation, how to get things going. We've got a featured event, we've got these different programs you have. We have an explanation of what the work is. One of the things we talked about early on with this client is the fact that no one understands what they do. They have this strange acronym for the name, and no one ever gets it. So I was like, well, we need to start educating them. So we're going through that, and with this process, you can quickly mock up pages. You can start to talk about grids. You can start to talk about different layouts and get them interested and excited with no design. There's a lot to object to here if you don't understand that there's no design here, but if it's just, is that title in the right place? Is that what you need for a title? Those things start to add up and work well. And you can see what we bouncing through here. We've got all of our media in. Just trying to get a sense of what order they want the media in, what's the most important stuff for past events, calendars, basic pages. And again, this took very little time for us internally to knock up. We're able to put little questions in. Do you want sharing? Do you want comments? And make them think about it in context so that we can get actually useful notes back. When we finished our process, again, a lot of the initial ideas have stayed. A lot of stuff that irritated them went out of the way. And it was a really rapid process that allows you to save a lot of time back.
Harris?
Yeah.
What tool are you using for your wireframe?
So there's a lot of really good ones out there. We use OmniGraffle. That's an on your computer application. It's a very simple, just drawing tool. And there's an existing set of what they call stencils from a company called Konigi, Konigi. And they're a set of stencils that have all this button, these various email sign-up forms. They have a lot of the basic website stuff built in, so you can drag and drop.
Yeah, so they have all of these kind of base elements here where you can drag these items into your wireframe, which can make it a lot faster to mock things up.
Yeah.
Like button, everyone knows what that is.
And there's tons of online, there's Balsamic, Mockingbird, and there are a lot of good.
OmniGraffle also has Graphitopia.
Graphitopia is.
Whatever you want to document, they've probably got stencils for it already.
That's right, yeah. So Greg was pointing out that they've got Graphitopia, which has a whole set of stencil libraries. So even if this one isn't quite right, or you need some other icon pack or something, it probably exists. And it's again, drag and drop. There's small files that export to PDF. You can even do certain amounts of interaction within here. Balsamic and Mockingbird and all those work as well. I'm a little ambivalent about monthly fees, so I don't know. I'd rather pay the one cost. But
Excuse me, question?
yes.
At this wireframe stage, have you gotten the contract at this point, or is this? Still
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All of this should be, except for the initial getting to know your client. This is all post-contract. This is again, you fail if you're getting to this point. But our process is slower. We have more conversations going into getting the job. And there are people who it just doesn't work for. They have a crazy tight deadline. And some months we need that. A lot of months that's not worth my time because I feel like a jerk at the end of the project. I didn't do anything particularly interesting for them. It wasn't interesting for me, and that's not worth it. That guy will find a website designer and he will be just fine.
Yeah.
He will get a great project out of it. I'm just not the dude to do it.
And with these wireframes, we really work with our client to refine them because we use them to inform building the site later. So on these, I think we did 5 revisions of wireframes before our client signed off on them. And we always have our client sign off on them and say, yes, that's good. we're happy with it, move forward.
Because seriously, just my experience, and I'm used to having the design sold. They
Yeah.
like the design, and that's how you sell the project.
Right.
So you guys haven't really gotten to the design stage yet.
Exactly, and we don't. I mean, we have occasionally, if that is their RFP, that you have to submit some finished piece, we'll give them that. But we also make it pretty clear that like, hey man, this is a shot in the dark, and I don't believe at all that that's the best design because it has nothing to do with what you need.
But
If that's how you think of websites, that's cool, then we can try and build that way. But this is our process when we've already made that case to people.
Well, and so much of our design is the information design, because it's really about assessing with the client, what is it that you need to put on this website, and what is the best way to take that information and communicate it to the user.
Yeah, that's a large part of our conversation. So I mean, that's something that we've really tried to move away from, and this is some of what's coming out of that. But don't worry, design's coming. I promise. Just like we do. So the wireframes are not designed broad. That you can do grid, you can do responsive layouts really quickly. You know, just for sake of comparison, I would say that 5 revisions, even with meetings that were so insanely long, 3-hour Skype calls to discuss 2 issues. Even with that sort of slowness on the client side, I think that entire period is like maybe 3 weeks. The only reason it was 3 weeks is that they could only meet on Mondays and Tuesdays. So really, we probably could have knocked that out in a week. And usually doing full comp outs, ridiculous. I mean, that's endless amounts of hours on my end. And that was not heavy, intensive work for me. That was go make some quick changes, send it off, wait a week for them to get back in the office and have another meeting. So this is it's so much more lightweight. And you get to talk to them about stuff that has nothing to do with the design part that are really important decisions that usually you have to fight them about later once they messes with your design. You know, that's an issue that comes up later as well. And as we've been saying, it really focuses your information architecture decisions, your navigation. They get to see what your section headings look like in context, so that it's suddenly, for instance, with these guys, one thing was, you know, the ways in which these programs up here are broken up. They have programs, they have fundraising events. This was an internal discussion they didn't anticipate that took them, you know, a lot of time while we were building that they would have never thought about seeing them out of context. They needed to see that, like, there's going to be a big word that says programs, and oh wait, some of our stuff is fundraising based, and that doesn't fit there, we're uncomfortable with that. That's something that kicks back to them and doesn't interrupt our process at all. We explain the limitations, and then they have to move on. Okay, so, and yeah, feel free to interject, that was great, thank you. So known unknowns, one of my favorite phrases. After all these discussions, you have a group of known unknowns. What are they? They're the sections that the client really cannot answer questions on. You keep pushing back on, and you're like, you keep kind of throwing this out there that you want a contact form, but like you keep not specifying who that should go to or what it actually says, or okay, you're really not sure? The content is not prepped. Oh, well, this section's going to be all the new photos. Are they horizontal or are they portrait? Have you already done the shoot? Can you give me a sense of what the color is going to be? No. Oh, well, this has to wrap into our new mail list person, but we haven't set up an account for that yet. They have an API. It's none of the ones you've heard of, but it'll work. You're working with a team that is fortunate enough to have its own development team. At some point, you guys are going to have to work with each other, but you've not been given that access yet. These are all real things that can happen. It's a trap. But it's okay. It's a trap that you are fully prepared for. Akbar is on your side. You can be ready for them. You can now know that, like, as you're scheduling out the rest of your time, give padding around those things. Put those things and keep the pressure on those items, because the rest of this, you have a lot of leeway to keep moving forward, hopefully. Now, does that mean that you just have to give everything and you get nothing out of this and whatever they ask for? Absolutely not. Be all that you can be within their expectations. This is a priority now. Just say no. Why do we do this? Because we're jerks? No, absolutely not. You have a clear picture of the project. You've already bid it, as you asked. You've already bid it. You've already either completed an RFP or they've agreed to your general ideas. You've really gotten thoroughly into what they want. You can now start saying no to scope creep. And when do you say no? Always. Always, always, always. Even if you can add it easily. That's one that happens to developers all the time. It's like, oh, you know what you're describing? That is not that hard, so why don't we do it? And that feels good because you're both stoked coming out of that meeting. No, it's not okay. Even if it's just a small addition. Well, I mean, all we're asking for is like one more text field on this page. Even if it's your own idea, which comes up probably more often than not. You're like, dude, but what would be dope is if we put a whole other search bar that leads to no, they're not worth it. Why? Because you can always add it later. These are things that you can start putting on the list, and you're not going to disappoint anybody if they don't show up. They're not part of your scope. And you're only going to disappoint people by saying you can do it and then be like, oh my God, we have so much other work to do. We have so much legitimate stuff that we discussed with this project that now doing this makes me upset. And so by just capping that a little bit, resisting your own impulses, it allows you to build a better product that they're more happy with in the end. It's not being mean, it is being realistic. This is what I was told when I was told about Santa Claus. So this is a very long quote. Escaping this flatland is the essential task of envisioning information. For all the interesting worlds, physical, biological, imaginary, human, that we seek to understand are inevitably and happily multivariate in nature. They're not flatlands. That's from Edward Tufte. He's like one of the more brilliant information designers out there. What he's really talking about here is something that as web designers we are struggling with a lot. Web designs are not making books. They're not making pages. We still talk about them as pages. We talk about them as like finished products that you could go hang on a wall. And occasionally that's true. It is extremely rare that that's true.
Especially with WordPress, because it's all a database dynamic system that's, in theory, your client is continually adding content to.
Right, you're building something that they theoretically can't break and shouldn't feel nervous about blowing the doors off of and have it still hang together and hold their content in a really good way. So that's why I highly recommend you start trying to move away from designing pages and designing systems. And this ties into the wireframes, this ties to a lot of the IA work we've done. So what does that mean, besides sounding like nonsense? It means that you use certain tools. You use things like grid systems, right? You use style types. You use the theme elements of whatever CMS you happen to be working with. You make comps only to prove out concepts and demonstrate goals that are important to the client. You do not make comps for every single iteration or page or section. It's not necessary. So what are grids? Everyone, I assume, uses grids at this point if you're doing front-end development? Grid systems? Yeah? Yes? Raise your hand. Anyone not know what grids are?
Okay, yeah, there's a couple.
Okay, cool. So grids are basically, there's enough, you can build your own. There are a number of existing frameworks as well that are CSS systems.
Yeah, and they're, so it's different kind of overviews with building blocks so that when you go and put your content in, you can have a framework that it all sits on, and it's like an orderly, like 12-column or 16-column grid that everything kind of sits on, hangs out on, and looks very nice together. And now, well, a lot of these grid systems are also responsive, so you can either have a fixed responsive grid or a fluid responsive grid, and that means that your content will, as you scale the browser down or look at it on a tablet or mobile device, then it will scale with your grid instead of just,
That's that old site.
yeah.
That doesn't have a grid. You can see a basic suggestion here, and this is a custom grid that we built, but it's rolling with a certain amount of gutters, a certain amount of flexibility that it can continue to respond to throughout different iterations.
Yeah, and then this is more of like a tablet view, and then we have a mobile view too. So when you're on these different views, I didn't get the footer yet.
But yeah, basically, why is this useful? It takes a lot of the pointless decision making out of it. Well, are things going to line up here or here? A lot of that's done. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so related to what do you coordinate the framework that you use with the wireframe software that you use? How do you, is there some sort of...
That's a great question. So he's asking if, like, for instance, we know we're using a grid, at what point do we bring that in to wireframing at the beginning? And so I've gone through, and we have a few set frameworks. We work with Skeleton as one of them. We've used Foundation a couple times. And you can go through and look at the grid, see what their rows and columns are, and then I just build out just guides in whatever. And I do it both in Photoshop and in OmniGraph.
And we'll have an internal discussion before we make wireframes and decide what grid we want to use, because that will help us lay out our wireframes and stick to them later. they'll be a more useful tool for us. And usually we do kind of use these, we have these certain grids that we work with. This is a totally custom grid because we decided we wanted
You were
to do
ambitious.
a fluid site because their content is very text heavy. Like if you click into the, yeah, that's great. Yeah, so we decided we wanted to do this fluid grid that we had to totally custom write ourselves, which was a bit more time intensive and more tedious. But I think ultimately will make a better site for them in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can talk a little bit about design decisions ahead of time, but part of this is like, these guys make, it's weird stuff. You're going to hear like tape loops and like broken laptops and like very avant-garde things. And so a big focus for us in our design discussions was giving them something unusual, giving them something that doesn't feel too clean, that is so much more organized, but feels like, for people who go to these events, something that is like edgy enough and weird enough that they don't feel like they're losing their soul to get a big website. So that was part of it.
What was your question?
Hi. Is it grid something like your theme, the different...
They're two parts of the same thing. Well, yeah, Ashley's going to pull something up. But basically, your theme, a lot of themes that are built have existing grids already in them. Some do not. Some don't care. Underscores, which is a base theme that we recommend and have used, doesn't care. It plays well with any grid you toss at. Yes?
And also, what about if you have an existing website on WordPress, with a certain theme, and you actually just want to change the theme, kind of another WordPress theme that, you like the way it looks in the front and it has everything in the back you need to know.
Yep.
How easy or complicated is that to just do?
With well-written themes, it's extremely easy. With poorly written themes, it's extremely hard. What that means is that if you have a theme that has a lot of custom stuff, it's doing a lot more than posts, it may be very difficult. You might turn off that theme and lose all of those customized posts.
But
we should maybe talk about that one-on-one. I'm sorry to say that, just because I'm already going to go over. I'm sorry, guys.
But I can say really quickly, so this is a grid system called Skeleton, and you can see how the grid is scaling here and changing as I change the screen size. And so what it does is it gives you these different CSS classes that you can apply to your different divs within your site. So they have I think it's one column, or it's column, span 2, span 3, and it tells your code how many columns you want to span within your overall 12-column framework. But we can talk about it more after.
Yeah, because I would say that the least interesting part of doing CSS layout is whether things are going to line up. I mean, and this doesn't even force you to line them up, but it takes a lot of those questions out of the way. So, yeah, there's fixed or fluid grids. Fixed basically means there are breakpoints for different responsive areas. Fluid means that it's all some sort of percentage. Yes?
I just wanted to ask earlier, if you're using grids or deciding a grid before for your wireframes, what are you basing the decision on if it's not design?
Base your decision on content. I was like, perfectly timed. Who is this? Worth the best $20 I've spent.
Wait, so you have the content before?
Well, because again, we've gone through and done that whole content assessment. We've gone through and really pushed on what kind of stuff we're looking at. And you can make some. I mean, it'll take some time. You have to play around with them and be like, oh yeah, this worked great, and this one was terrible with video. I mean, there are things that are intricacies around it.
But that's why wireframes really are part of the design process, because it's the information design. And so you're starting there, and choosing your grid when you're starting that process is just going to save you time in the long run.
Yeah, but you can push them on, you're telling me there's text on this page. Is it short or is it long? Even if you have rough stuff, give me a sense. Are we talking about 2 pages worth of text? Because that doesn't mean anything. And then you can start to make a grid based on we need a really wide gutters because there's not a lot of content or whatever that might be. But I think there's those sorts of decisions. It basically comes down to what your rhythm and your spacing are on that design decision. We went with a fluid grid for this because there was a lot of text. They are hard. This is true. We also did some super ambitious things of it's going to be a golden ratio and this thing's going to be over here, and it was it's great, but actually
lots of calculations.
Lots of strange percentages going on. Generally, Fix is going to do a good job with a variety of content. They're well supported. I would say start there with the Fixed Grid Skeleton.
Or the 960 grid system is a really popular one too. There's more. I can't think of them right now.
And the best thing about, as we've been spinning their wheels on is that grids limit your choices. They just take some of the discussion out of your hands in a good way. They allow you to do some really more interesting things. I mean, some of the stuff that we've done on this site, again, it's using a grid. It's using a grid, but you can see that actually we've done this here where we've broken these out. These are infinitely spanning. When you're on like a huge site, the nav bar and these two bars just spread out. They'll fill up your 1600, 2400, 3000 pixel monitor, it doesn't matter. That breaks the grid a little bit, but it doesn't mean that like just because you're using a grid system, it's exactly 960 pixels. There are ways to get flexible and fun with it, without having to, again, reinvent the wheel every time. Style tiles. So this is our major component of design. These are for broad stroke design decisions. Oddly enough, very similar to some of the stuff we already took care of in wireframes. They cover things like type, color, rhythm, feel. These are unfinished. They're not like a finished comp you're turning in and you can let the client know that they should feel a little rough. They easily allow you to swap different elements, and they're great for conversation. At this point, if you still haven't been able to pin down exactly what the client is talking about, this allows you to get to that point. So here are some examples of sites. So initially, one of the things with this client is that they did not want any aesthetic change at all, and rapidly, through our initial discussions, we found that they really needed a change. So so just some very different looks.
Yeah, these are just some of the examples of the style tiles we made them. So you can see we're using the same elements, and we have like some text, a heading, we have an image with a caption, different colors that we would use in the design, and just differently.
A sample of an audio player based on one of the candidate audio players we know existed. Yes.
When you say style tiles, are you talking about the website, or are you talking about
So
style
these are a
tiles?
finished HTML hosted thing with live text as much as possible.
Not style tile, the website.
No,
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably a tool.
Different directions that you're presenting to your clients. right?
Exactly. So now we've gotten to the point where we've got our conceptual discussion.
And we wind up making these, knocking them together in HTML because we find it's easier to show our clients things like a button interaction, or like what Eris was showing, like with the responsive changes of the browser.
Yeah, because it gets old at some point when people are getting confused and talking about the wrong thing. Why is this sitting too low in the browser? Well, it's a JPEG, and it's just weird. I don't know. Just look at the thing I sent you. So this is our attempt to get around those elements. And you can see that this is a mishmash of stuff. It's not a finished page, but it does have a lot of elements to discuss.
And then it allows us to go forward and refine the style tile, mixing in some of the different elements that we worked with. And then like for this client, they wound up being interested in seeing some different color palettes. So we were able to really easily put that together with our style tile and apply those changes and just show them really easily rather than having to like make a million different Photoshop files.
But again, haven't made a single page yet. Haven't made anything that takes the amount of time that a page does. And you can see that one thing that we did here, like we added this, we knew they liked the caption from the other ones, we just threw it on here. It's very quick to just knock those together. And now the way that these work is that they also line up with theme elements, right? You've got pieces in your WordPress thing. You've got post headers. You've got page headers. You've got buttons. You've got links within text. You've got captions. We knew that we specifically had an audio player here. All those things are represented here without having to go too far. But now we've got this WordPress, which is modular, right? We repeat widgets, we repeat titles all over the site. It happens off the same piece of code generally. Your style tile is generally modular. It's broken up in that way. You can put the two together. You now have a huge amount of your design work done. That's something that if you can go through and just lay those out, you're going to get a pretty well made up site very quickly. With style tiles in hand, if your client trusts you, again, if they're totally signed up, you can even maybe walk away with no comps at all and get into making direct changes in the browser. You're going to get feedback from them. But that would be a huge time saver. Occasionally, they're not comfortable with that. They need to do comps. So why do we do comps? You're knocking out the details. You're getting them as complete as possible for you and the client, and for if you're not developing it yourself, you're a developer. Use this time to nail out any lingering hesitation about the design, any big questions that keep coming up. So,
about layout of a page, are you thinking about potential WordPress themes that could be applicable to that, or you're just gonna like?
Well, we're
design-
gonna, for this project, we're gonna write our own custom theme, so we don't need to think about a WordPress theme. But if we were going to build within an existing WordPress theme, we would absolutely have already picked it before we did our wireframes. So that, because that is, so much of the layout is predetermined in certain elements, that you would want to kind of already have that decision made before you get too far into the design process, because otherwise you might wind up with a real headache on your hands and like trying to change these elements, and it winds up being a real struggle because you're fighting against decisions that were already made by the theme designer. But so in this case, we're writing our own theme, so we are pretty open with what we can do.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm looking to get more into for how things look on Word. I don't know how much you covered it, but I would like to know more about how you guys organize your workflow and your responsibility. And like for you, is it like, okay, here's this folder and this is the CSS folder, copy this folder name, and you know, like this is our dates, this is what has to be done, like kind of like how you guys use any tools specifically to organize yourself, or what does it look like when you use it in the process?
That's a really good question. I think that probably we'll try and get all the way through this presentation, and then we can circle back to that because there are tools that we use. But I think we should stay focused on this before diving into that.
You have one more question? Okay. So yeah, so here you can see a comp that is very detailed. We laid everything out. We've got our temp in SoundCloud players, because by that time they made a decision to go with SoundCloud. We have a video still with some sizing. We're just sort of starting to lay out, give them a demonstration of what's possible with their new theme. You know, and it changes. We give different states in here. The home page was a real issue, and we changed dramatically, because of sort of some different opinions within their organization. But you know, these are pretty standard. They look like website comments, right? You know, we did, and one of the things that we did here is we demonstrated an idea we had for like doing an animated little box around here that would sort of flicker on and off and move through different like colors and shapes on the border, which is, you know, trying to explain that. I couldn't even explain it with the graphics. So there's things like that you might have to prove out. Then it's worth your time, because you're going to get a good product out of it. But oftentimes you are designing a blog that you already understand 10 steps down the road how it's going to look. So who benefited from that? The client? Probably not.
But so this was our final comp for the homepage, and as you can see, it looks very, very similar to the actual homepage of the site.
So, okay. Cool. That kind of covers our design process. At that point, once we even have those style tiles approved, Ashley has already moved into building out and painting up the theme. You know, and then if we're waiting on any specific examples like those comps, usually those aren't the main decisions. Those are other things. Like even in that situation, I pushed to make sure the events got done first. And then the homepage, we kind of went back and forth on as she was building out the events, because the events were such a fundamental part of the site. So yeah, so now that's already happened. Now I move into doing any of the custom functionality that we're going to do, and the question of whether you DIY or not. Always DIY? No. Why do you do that? Assess what exists. You should go look around and see if somebody's already doing what you're doing, because WordPress is a wonderful open source community. It's one of the powers of WordPress, and hopefully one of the reasons you're working on this platform, is that somebody's probably done it really well, and you can probably figure out a way to integrate it into your theme. When you're looking at those things, think of what you're going to have to do to fight it and get it to do exactly what you need it to do. And if somebody has something that's just clearly better for that solution, there's no pride or like anything at stake in just using that solution, as long as it does what it needs to do, and that the client is happy, and that you didn't put in some like ticking time bomb in code. So with events, are there existing solutions? Absolutely, there's tons. Do they fit the budget? Some do, some don't. Some have yearly fees, things like that. Do they do exactly what I want? None of them were quite there. Some were close, but they were either way more, way more. Or they were a little bit difficult to use and confusing in terms of how these clients are going to need to use it. And are they easy to extend? Are they easy to build on? Because I knew that there's a bunch of stuff that's very different. So what are the things that are different? They have a unique ticketing system. They don't need any ticketing on this site. It's dealt with by the CRM they use, but they're never going to get on. So that was overkill on most of those events things. The events don't go away on this site. They become the archive page because all of these are experiences that have all the media associated with it. That's something that a lot of ticketing things don't really do that well. They don't have a nice way to translate that. The events often require tons of text and lots of extra data to make sense of it. That's something that a lot of events are not set up to do. And we need to accommodate all the weird quirks of the old site. And we didn't need a lot of the customary stuff. There's no organizers for these events. A lot of the things that were built in, like CRMs and managing contacts, are not necessary. And most importantly, building on top of these things was difficult, if not impossible, because a lot of them are freemium products that aren't as interested in having easy access. So we built our own events plugin. Basically what it is actually 3 custom post types, or I guess only 2. Yeah. It's been a year by. So there's an event, there are locations, and then there are 4 custom taxonomies within this. We're using advanced custom fields to make all of our meta boxes. Did I custom code all of these meta boxes? Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. They take forever. You have to validate them. You're probably going to do it wrong rather than doing it right. And doing things like figuring out how to add the JavaScript on the back end so I can have nice, easy tabs for these guys is absurd. So that right there is an example. Advanced custom fields does meta boxes better than I'm ever going to do. There are a few significant cases I can see, but yeah. So we are able to give them something that they have some strange things like series handles. They have some very specific needs for their title. They can number events because some of the programs are numbered. They have their regular dates, the event summary, all those sorts of elements. And it allows us to really rely on this to be a really nice system that probably could take them another decade if they want to do it. A key element of this, these are not built into the theme. These are plugins. These plugins exist, so even if they want to change the theme, they don't lose all the events, they don't lose all the locations, they don't lose the data they mentioned. They will lose how it looks. That doesn't matter, really. If another great developer design comes along in the future, they can change it. And that brings us to our last part. Future-proof your work. Be an expert. And you don't have to be a developer to future-proof. You just have to think about things that that your client can't. Consider how the site's going to grow. Think about things like archives, how those going to need to be presented. How is all this stuff organized on the back end? Does it make sense to an end user on their company to actually enter this information? What do you need to do about pagination? How is that going to work? Is it necessary? How does it interact with search? Are you even using search? Are you doing another search on top of it? This is something that we encountered because they were like, oh, and we'll just throw it all on WordPress search, right? It'll just magically work. No, not. Because WordPress search is slow and also has a few other quirks to it that make it more difficult to do, and especially not useful when they have lots of unique names and things that people probably haven't heard. So what we really needed to do was an archive page that lists all their terms, and has, these are for people who have no idea what they do, have seen one show and need a way in. Some recommendations, instruments that they use. Here are all the programs that are involved. Here are all the different venues that they have programs at. So if someone saw something and they're like, I have no idea what it was, but I know it was at Baldwin Hills Scenic Overlook, they can go look at that. And here are all of their various artists that they're filling in.
This is kind of like a more controlled way to do a search, because really what a search is allowing people different ways to browse your content. And so in terms of these events that they're making, we wanted to just give them a lot of different access points for different people to get in and explore the different events that they've done, listen to the audio, watch the videos.
And this is an example of that, the client knows a lot about what they're doing, but they don't understand the new user that's never used their thing. And us as outsiders, we can bring that perspective and try and say, well, what would be better than the search is something like this, where now I've clicked on sound within that archive page, and it's limited down all my artists by only people who've played sound effects. It's limited my venues by only venues that have had sound effects. And that continues to filter down as you go through these various things. Something that is, I think, better than search. And you need to get ahead of the client and anticipating this one thing. This is one where you don't need their participation, you need to kind of corner them. Be modular. So as I said before, our custom post types and our taxonomies are in plugins. They can be turned off, or they can be turned off. If you change the theme, it will not lose all the data. Build small. Build the minimum thing that you need, but allow it to grow. Build with tools that can get bigger. Separate your logic of presentation. One good example of this, because that's a very confusing term. So this right here, the subcomment sound array. I could have written this as a widget and dropped it in. I guess we didn't exert the effort to do so, but what this is actually relying on is this goes and finds all of these posts. It finds the latest posts, has them all in an array, sitting around. We use this data in a few different places. There's one function that just goes in the database, grabs these things and drops them into what's called a transient, which is a way to, it's a caching tool that drops into the database. This data is now here, and on the home page, and on the calendar page, and on the blog. All of that having to make extra database calls. So it's just able to go through, cache that stuff, pull it out, and all these presentations can be different because it's just an array of posts. It's all it's giving me back, just like any other part of WordPress. But that's something that I'm able to do that helps their site run quicker, and it also doesn't really affect anything. Again, if they change the theme, they don't care how the calendars look at the So yeah, sorry that was a little long. This is just one process. We're still kind of figuring it out. I'm interested in questions, comments you guys have. I know there's some real big brains who probably do it better here, so yeah.
I was wondering about the style tiles versus the comps that you do. So if you, and you're saying, and I can see where it would make sense if some people would just want to go with the style tiles and that'd be enough. But at what point do you agree to do comps, and do you must charge for it? How does that all work itself out?
We, at this juncture, we're still building into our deals that there will be X amount of comps if they're necessary, but we are very specific about the language of it. It's going to be unique layouts. It's going to be special situations that require it. And then, part of this, and I hope that comes through because I know it can be a little standoffish, so part of this is that at the end of the day, I think we all want to end up in a very good relationship with the client. We want them to feel like they've been along for the ride, that this has been something you guys have worked on in partnership, and they want to work with you again, they want to recommend it. So we try and establish throughout all of this, even when things like on this project we're having long meetings and confused situations, we feel like we can say, I think you got to just trust us on this. And you don't want to push them right out of the gate because then it gets weird. But I think once you've done a couple comps, you can say, this feels good, right? Yeah, we're going to move forward. In a couple weeks, you're going to see a finished site, and then we can tweak things. So that's how we're handling it right now. I'm sure that will continue evolving. Yeah.
Yeah, so as a designer, I can really appreciate how this process is going through wireframing, prompting, and style file and all of that. But if you have a client who's not design savvy, how do you sell them on this process? Because I know that as much as I would like some of my clients to, as much as I'd like some of my clients to be able to go with me from stage to stage here, I know a lot of them get lost in, they could understand the purpose of a wireframe, but asking them to visualize, make a jump from wireframe to finished website, I can see that.
Yeah.
I've done it before,
Yeah.
many times, but asking them to do that sometimes if you're not dealing with a design savvy person is a little hard. So, and maybe I guess I would be concerned about handicapping them in a sense by not showing them something a little bit more finished.
Sure.
So anyway,
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
Yeah, I think that part of that answer comes from really assessing your client in the beginning and getting to know them, and recognizing that if you have a client who's not going to be able to look at wireframes and understand them, then there is no point in showing them the wireframes because it will make more work for you trying to explain it and getting them on board. And in the case that we work with a client that's kind of more like that, we'll still do our wireframes, we'll just keep them internal, and then we'll often show them, we might wind up doing a few more comps because we won't go as in-depth with the wireframes as we did here. So this client, we knew they were kind of tech savvy, they built their old website, which was, not the most beautiful, but definitely they have some experience with it, so they could kind of understand what we were talking about and were familiar with the language. So it's just kind of, I think, comes down to assessing your client and deciding, should you spend more time in wireframes, should you spend more time in comps, and what's going to be most beneficial for both you and them to get the project done like in time and within the budget.
Yeah, and I think you can still work style tiles into that, because I think you skip that wireframe process, you do a lot of your internal thinking, that helps you know the elements, again, you're gonna be dealing with in the finished design. And then then it becomes more like then we present that usually to a client as a mood board. And then people like that idea, and they can respond to it, and that way you can knock out a lot of typography questions, color questions. They don't feel as stressed about the layout. And you're still able to make use of those two things, so then the next thing you can do is still maybe show them live coded site rather than having that in between step. I think there are ways to, wrestle with this. Anyone else? Thanks so much for your patience and indulgence. Oh, yeah. Sorry. So people were asking about our specific process for how we're managing projects. It's a combination of, so we have our actual
the main thing that we use to organize our projects is Basecamp, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with Basecamp, but that allows us to both bring our clients into it, and we use that for all of our scheduling and outlining our tasks. And then later when we're actually building the site, we'll often break down, come up with really specific to-do lists for front-end programming, back-end programming, with every task, so we can just go through and check them off and make sure we're getting everything done. And then, what were you going to say?
Yeah, and then in terms of files, we happen to work in the same office, so we have our hard files, anything that's not going on the website exists just on a shared server, but then we use Git for all of our version control, which means that all of our code is consistent between both of our local machines and whatever development server we're using online. So that means that I have a mirror directory of all the WordPress files, plugins, everything else. She has that directory, and we keep all that stuff in the same depth.
Does that answer your question, or is there?
Okay.
One more question I want to ask is just having to do with efficiency. I find that in the design process or in the WordPress process specifically, a lot of frustration can come up, and sometimes it feels like you want to do something really simple and it just kind of blow out of proportion. And so I'm wondering, throughout your experience, did you ever hit a point, this is something that helped make things efficient, but did you ever hit a point where it was like, aha, if I can get this down, I can start to do things efficiently? If I want to make a site, I can get it done in this much time and not have to.
Yeah, I think that this is a result of that for sure. Even though this sort of the legwork on this was longer than we thought, as I pointed out, our sort of initial time estimates on design sign-off were long. We built this out from nothing in about 3 weeks. So. I think that helps. I think that knowing usually those things, those blow-ups are generally caused by you don't have a clear picture of where you're trying to end up. And I think you need to leave room for experimentation. Obviously, that's a key joy to this job, but knowing where you're trying to go will prevent those things being explosions and more fun experiments. This is not working right, but it's okay. Rather than I'm up against the deadline, this is not working, and the client doesn't understand, and this is a problem.
And I would also say that as you develop more sites, you'll have more tools that you're familiar with working with, so that when you're starting a theme, or if there's a certain widget that you want to use, you'll be you don't have to look through, if you're looking for a widget to do something, you don't have to research and look through hundreds of widgets. You can be oh no, I'm going to use that one because I know it works really well and I'm familiar with it. And so some of that stuff, you kind of build up experience with it, and that makes it a lot easier going forward too, I think. Anyone else?
Cool. All right. This time, thanks for your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you.